In this video, I'll be making my table saw mobile. My workshop is, I like to keep it clean, and I don't have huge dust collection systems. So most of my work on the table saw, and I do a fair bit making hives and whatnot, but it needs to be done outside. I need to be able to move the table saw outside the workshop. I built it with a big awning out the front for this purpose. After looking at a number of the options locally, I decided to go with the Bora heavy duty universal mobile base. This is overkill for this table saw. I do intend eventually on adjusting one of the wings on the saw and putting a router table in one of the wings. I built a cabinet for my router probably a bit over a year ago, and while it's okay, it's functional, it takes up a lot of space for what it is. I just don't use a router enough to justify the amount of space it takes up. So this is what I went with. Let's have a look inside. So this is what came in the box. And the instructions explain how I've got to put it together. The first step though is going to be measuring the base of my table saw just so I can make these side pieces the correct length. As you can see with the side pieces, there are shorter and larger sections, and the shorter sections are narrower, so they slide inside the larger sections. That's so you can get your correct length, of course. They do give recommendations. You can put the wheels sideways for things with a really small footprint. For example, if you were using this base with or the casters with a drill press or something like that, you could certainly put the wheels sideways and they'll give you a bigger footprint when you're moving it around. My table saw has a fair footprint anyway, and I don't want the wheels sticking out to the front or back like that, so I'm going to go with them being in line with each other, the back wheels and the lowering casters, and I'm going to put them going sideways across the table saw, because if you think about a table saw, you're pushing the wood through it, so the pushing directions, I want them to go this way with the wheels facing that way, because this back wheel here is still technically able to roll, and it's the feet that lower down when you lift the casters that stop it from moving, but I'd still prefer these to be at 90 degrees to the direction of force. So that's what I'm going with. And this is why you measure before you get started. My amazing discovery is I won't actually need any of these smaller pieces. The lengths I'm dealing with, I can just use the larger side of the pair, and it's actually long enough with plenty of overlap actually. So if you've got a larger machine, obviously you're going to need to join these together as per the instructions, but I'm not going to need to. I'm in two minds about that. A, I'm of course paying for extra material that I didn't need, but B, it should theoretically be a little bit more rigid, so yeah, that's a plus. This wasn't in the instructions, but I figured out that 2 washers on the inside of this wheel here works better. Now there's no easy way to hold these, so I'm using needle nose pliers to slide them down. And so I can get this bolt through. Bingo. All right. Now the reason for those 2 washers, it just keeps the wheel on the outside here so it doesn't hit that nut, or sorry, that bolt head that I've got on the inside there. I will show you quickly. It doesn't matter if you pinch the wheel because it's actually spinning on a bearing. The center of the wheel doesn't move against the metal. So that's quite high quality in my mind anyway. As it turns out, along this longer side, if I just use the one piece, I'm only getting 2 bolts or 2 holes in on each side. And as you can see, before I tighten it up, there's a fair bit of movement in there. I'd prefer the 2 bolts to be further apart. So I am actually going to use the second stretcher that fits inside on these 2 longer sides. You can see with that extra stretcher in there now, I've now got my bolt holes further apart on either side and quite a bit of overlap in the middle. So it's much sturdier. Even before tightening it up, it's much sturdier. Next I've got to add these little leveling feet, and I didn't realise, but these holes are actually threaded. Now there is a bit of paint in there, but the thread of the bolt should cut that out as it goes through. And so these are used, so the machine sits on these when you've got the caster. So this caster can engage and disengage, and when it's disengaged the machine will sit on these feet and the wheel at the other end. So I'm going to level these with the wheel so the frame is level before I put the casters on. So the base is sturdy and level. It's now time to put in the final, or the adjustable casters and the levers. I'm also considering adding a square of plywood in the base. This would make it much more rigid. The downside is it'd lift the machine by another ½ inch or so, depending how thick a plywood I use. Still thinking about it. In assembling the adjustable casters, I've just done the other side so I didn't make a fool of myself on camera. The instructions say to do the wheel last. I find it's actually easier to do first. Side ribs up. And the wheel goes through the second hole at the back there. You can see the bolts have a square locking section just underneath the bolt head. So as you put it through, you can turn it until that square lock slides in. Now on these casters they come with lock nuts so they won't come undone. Now this is the lever that pushes the caster up and down. So right now you can see it's not actually engaging. The machine would still be resting on this base foot here, but when you engage the wheel it pushes it up so you can wheel it around. Now bolt goes through one side. You're going to have one of these nylon washers on either side of the lever. So just like before, I'm going to use the needle nose pliers. The instruction manual just say push a bolt through from the other side, which is fine too. I just find this way easier. Except for this time when I missed. Being lock nuts, they don't have to go super tight. You don't want to bend any of the metal. And there you go, done. And you can see when the lever's up, the machine sits on the foot there. When you push the lever down, lifts the machine. And when you do both sides, you can roll it around. What do I think? Well, it's plenty sturdy. If I push on it, I do get some movement, and ideally you'd have none. But it is minimal, and in terms of the way I use a table saw, it isn't the end of the world. I do really want to put a piece of ply across the base. I think that'd stiffen it up that bit more, and maybe I could take the rubber stoppers off the feet and actually bolt through the feet, through the ply, and through these corner sections of the casters. That's an idea for the future. I'm not going to do it now. For now, it's perfectly usable. It seems to be a really well-made product. The powder coating's good. All the components seem to be of a high quality. I'm really happy with it. With that said, who's it for? Well, I could make a dolly or even a cabinet cart for this table saw. Maybe one day I will. But in terms of a quick solution that's not too expensive, that works well, does what it says, I really like this. And I think in the event that I eventually do build a cabinet base for this table saw, or perhaps weld up something a bit more substantial, I'm still going to use these 4-corner casters. The design, particularly of these lifting casters, is just excellent. I love it. It's really good. So anyway, that's what I did to make my table saw mobile. I hope you found this video useful. Thanks for watching.